Thank you, everyone, for having me here. So I'm actually going to start out with a very provocative question. What's good about gossip? Religions and societies around the world are united by their condemnation of this behavior. We're all told from the time we're children, by our parents, by our teachers, by every authority figure, that don't gossip. It's immoral, it's wrong, and it's, at best, it can be seen as a behavior that's idle, that's frivolous, a waste of time. And certainly at its worst, it's seen as a behavior that's malicious, hurtful, aggressive, and a really underhanded way to get and utilize information. I had certainly heard all of these. I grew up in a very tight-knit, large community in India, and if you know anything about large, tight-knit communities, people talk a lot about each other. And I spent a lot of my childhood eavesdropping and listening in on conversations, and then when my curiosity would get the best of me, I'd ask questions, and people would turn around and look at me with disapproving looks and wagging fingers and say, don't you know you're not supposed to gossip? And then I would slink away feeling really guilty and bad about myself. And then I started my first job, and I had a really interesting experience that changed the way I thought about this behavior that had been described as so appalling and so destructive. I joined a group of people that had been working together a really long time. They liked each other, they knew a lot about each other, and I was very much an outsider. And as I sort of spent my time in this organization, I felt very socially excluded. And if any of you have experienced that, and I'm talking at a high school, so I'm going to stop right there, it is a really painful and frustrating and hurtful experience. But one day, as I sat in my little cubicle feeling quite sorry for myself, I received a little ping on my computer, and we used to chat with each other at work through this instant messaging program, and someone sent me a little message telling me gossip about one of my team members. And if you ask me now, and if you ask me then what they told me, I would not be able to tell you that. What I will be able to tell you then and now is the burst of energy and excitement that I felt that I was finally included. And it led me down this path of actually thinking about how this behavior could actually be positive. I'm gonna stop right here and get my clicker, because I realized I left it down there. Sorry about that. It turns out we spend a really large part of our lives talking about other people. 3 researchers in 1997 actually conducted a study using really unorthodox means. They eavesdropped on people's conversations in cafeterias and trains and found out that we spend about 2/3 of social conversation time talking about other people. And when we're not talking about people in our social networks, we're feeding our appetite for gossip by talking about media celebrities. I mean, do we really need to know that Kim Kardashian hates her pregnant body, or that Justin Bieber is a terrible neighbor, or more positively, that Angelina Jolie has been really brave in the way she's dealt with her double mastectomy? It turns out that celebrity gossip is actually one of the fastest growing parts of the print industry, an industry that's actually slowly dying. And when we're not reading about people, we're watching shows about people being gossiped about for 6 seasons, no less. No one, and I want to say no one, is immune to this behavior. It is a truly universal activity. Research has actually shown that tribal members in the Pacific Islands, rural communities in Mexico, urban communities all over the world, as well as high school and middle school students and their teachers engage in gossip. And not only that, I study organizational behavior, which means I'm really interested in this behavior and the way it functions at work. And some of the more recent findings we've had suggest that people of all different, in all different workplaces actually engage in this behavior. For example, an examination of the emails sent by executives at Enron showed that 7,500 emails were actually of a gossipy nature. And that even diplomats couldn't resist their urges to gossip by actually sending gossip over diplomatic cable lines. So overall, what some recent work has actually shown is that 96% of employees state or admit to gossiping in the workplace, which suggests that this is actually a behavior, an informal interaction that colors employees' experiences at work, and it must influence the way they think, the way they feel, the way they behave, and the way they interact with each other in the workplace. So what is this behavior? It has two main characteristics. Imagine two gossipers, or two people, exchanging gossip with each other. The first component of this is that it involves conversation about a person who is not present in the room. The second aspect of this is that this evaluation or discussion of this person involves some type of judgment. This judgment can be positive as well as negative in nature. It also depends a lot on the context. And so at work, for example, two people talking about someone in terms of a promotion decision would not be actually considered gossip. And so it is a really important thing to keep in mind when we think about this behavior. But as I've been talking about this, I've told you a lot so far about what it's about and some of the negative things we know about it. But what's really positive about this? There's an evolutionary biologist called Robin Dunbar who actually has a really interesting hypothesis. He says that language, our ability to talk to each other, evolves simply for the purpose of engaging in gossip. And he studied some of our ancestors, and I mean our ancestors, basically suggesting that social grooming, which is what primates do, was a way to form alliances with each other. And that as group sizes started getting bigger and bigger, they were unable to continue the social grooming process with hundreds and hundreds of people at any given point in time. And so language actually developed as a way of sharing information about other people in our groups and networks. And so overall, they proposed that in terms of society or groups or large communities, gossip has four main functions. It allows people to gather and disseminate information about each other. It allows people or groups to establish norms. So if somebody doesn't follow the norms, you can actually hurt them by discussing and hurting their reputation. By sharing these norms and agreeing upon what's good behavior, we also establish group solidarity. And then finally, it's just kind of fun and is a relief from the monotony of daily life. I came into this from a very different perspective. I said, well, we know a lot about how this operates in groups, but what about the individual? In the workplace, while we do tend to think about things as larger groups, there's also individual harms or benefits that can be accrued for the individual. And so I started out by thinking about how gossip would influence an individual's feelings and their behaviors, but also because it involves, at minimum, two individuals talking to each other, how it influences the dyad, or the pair of people engaging in gossip together. So how did I do this? I started out by conducting an experimental study in which I had pairs of friends come into the lab. I divided them into three different groups. In the first group, they were told to gossip. Now, of course, I was really careful. I didn't actually say, go out and gossip, because of course, people would turn around and they would immediately clam up, right? They would say, we don't gossip, that's wrong. So all I told them to do was talk about other people, and then I went back and looked at what they said. To compare this to other types of behaviors, I had a separate group of people engage in self-disclosure or talking about themselves, and a third group of people engaging in a creative task discussion. I then, after they completed these conversations that lasted about 10 minutes, I then had them engage in a negotiation to see if these behaviors actually had any lasting effect on other types of work behaviors. All of these were recorded with a hidden camera so that I could actually analyze these videos afterward. What did I find? So as I sat outside these rooms, it turns out that the squeals of laughter that I heard coming out of the rooms where people were gossiping actually meant something. People who gossiped felt and showed higher levels of positive emotion, and this was done by a series of coders who rated these videos, found that people who gossiped laughed more, smiled more, just seemed to be overall happier. And you could say, well, what good are positive emotions? Well, research over years has actually shown that positive emotions at the workplace and outside have all kinds of wonderful benefits. They allow people to have better performance, more creativity, help each other more, and also are related to some of the things that I also found. One being they were able to actually show and feel better relationship outcomes. So people who gossiped reported feeling closer to each other, but also changed their body language so that when my coders actually went and rated the body language they exhibited, they found that the people who gossiped actually mimicked each other's expressions, actually moved their chairs to be closer to each other, and actually leaned into each other more, sort of highlighting this idea of more rapport in the gossip condition than the other two. Most essentially, because I was interested in studying this in the workplace, I also explored how likely they were to cooperate in this negotiation that they engaged in after they gossiped, and found, not surprisingly, that the people who actually engaged in gossip were also more likely to cooperate with each other in a negotiation that was separate from the instance in which they gossiped. So I've just told you now that gossip tends to have all these positive benefits for the individual and for the dyad. And the question I usually get at this point, well, there are two, but the first one is, what about gender? Don't we all think about gossip as something that women do? Isn't this sort of a feminine verb that women are the ones who are considered to be gossip? And I am both relieved and encouraged to share with you my findings that, in a word, there were no differences. Both male and female participants in my study, and also shown in many other research studies that have been done on this, showed the same levels of gossip and also were able to accrue the same benefits. The differences were women tended to talk more about their intimate others, their good friends, maybe that's why they tend to get a bad name, versus men tended to talk about sort of larger groups, their fraternity members, sports people, politicians, people all over the place. Okay, but of course, I couldn't actually leave without telling you some of the caveats. I mean, my point really isn't here to come here and give you all carte blanche to go out there and just start gossiping wildly all over the place. The point really is to sort of tell you how you can utilize this behavior and understand it. So I'm going to tell you two caveats, and the first one is what you're talking about or what you say. And the second one is who you talk about. So in my research, as I went back and coded these gossip conversations, I found that people who engaged in negative gossip, it was just more common. It was very, very prevalent. Very few pairs talked about other people positively. This is actually really problematic because negative gossip comes with a series of costs, both for the individual and for the group. So individuals who engaged in negative gossip had a sort of a drop in their self-esteem. They just felt kind of bad about themselves. Other research has actually shown that people who engage in high-frequency negative gossip are less likable and are also seen as less powerful. In addition, some social network research shows that targets of negative gossip are especially hurt by this. And so bankers who were targets of negative gossip were less able to work with colleagues and were very likely to leave the organization. And so because negative gossip tends to be more predominant, this is one of the reasons gossip tends to get a really bad name. The other thing I wanted to highlight to you is who you talk about, or the target of who you talk about is really, really important. In every experiment, or the aspects of the experiment that I showed you, all I looked at was this, which is a pair. Right? We tend to think about engaging in gossip in these individual pairs or dyads, as we refer to them. However, we don't go through life in dyads. We go through life as being parts of larger social entities, whether it's families in a social setting, or schools, or classes, or in the workplace, teams and organizational units. And so when we are connected to a larger social network and we talk about people in this social network, within our group, this can be really problematic for the group itself. And so I did another study in which I examined 100 groups over time and the extent to which gossip influenced various outcomes, and found that groups that talked a lot about each other and people inside of the group had, as you can imagine, many different types of issues. There was more conflict, less cooperation, they just liked each other less and they didn't want to work together anymore. Groups, on the other hand, that talked about people outside of their group, what I call extra team gossip, were likely to feel much better about themselves. They were more cooperative, they liked each other more, they were really satisfied being in the group. So, as I said, when I started this, I started with a provocative question, but I'd like to flip it a little bit and make it a really thought-provoking one. So, what's good about gossip is now going to be, how can you make gossip good in your life? And so I have three overarching messages. The first one is, forgive yourself and others. As I've tried to explain to you, this is a behavior that we all can't help engaging in. It's part of who we are. It's part of our evolution. And so when you find yourself in a situation where you are engaging in it, or someone comes and tells you this, not only forgive yourself for engaging in it, but also try and forgive the person who came and shared this information with you. But of course, given the two caveats that I mentioned, understand who you're talking about. When you are talking about someone and you're thinking about who this target is, be very, very, very careful about your relationship with them. Is this a person who is in your in-group? Is this a person who is close to your network? Is this a person in your family, in your team? And don't just think about the effects you're going to have on them. Think about the effects you're actually going to have on the team when you engage in this behavior. And then the second one is focusing on the positive versus the negative. I told you a lot about the effects of negative gossip, the fact that it led people to actually, it was more prevalent and it actually had these multiple negative effects. But I didn't really tell you that much about what positive gossip was or the effects it had. It turned out in my data that people who engaged in positive gossip were able to actually attain the same relational benefits and the same cooperative benefits that people who engaged in negative gossip. And so the biggest message to you really is that when you find yourselves in a situation talking about other people, focus on the positive. Thank you very much.